seeing. However, this is the biggest problem with sectarianism. Sectarianism is about exploiting differences. Differences in the way we believe about things, the differences in the way we practice things. Sectarianism is definitely tied to religion, so therefore we're looking at an issue that is very much to use a very bad phrase, the heart and soul of all individuals. Sectarianism, to me, is about when groups, individuals, others exploit these differences to create hatred, to engage in discrimination, to foment violence, to heighten tensions. And this is the biggest problem we're facing from a human rights perspective. Acts of sectarianism can be manifested in a variety of ways, some of which I don't want to say are harmless, but they could be relatively harmless. We could joke about each other's faith, provided we know it ends there. However, sectarianism is most often manifested in issues such as verbal and physical abuse, intimidation, discrimination, physical violence, and what we're seeing on the world stage now, actual threats to security as states and society exploit sectarianism for their geopolitical, their geostrategic goals. Essentially, with sectarianism, the problem I think we're facing now in terms of resolving the issue is that everything in our conflicts, major conflicts that we're facing in the world, not just the Middle East, has to be put in a sectarian context. It seems that the religious belief is at the core of it all, which is putting the facts in a certain way, is putting beliefs in a certain way, and is very much sort of modifying the ability of us to actually engage in a conversation to bring about a resolution. Now, from my perspective, sectarianism is very much a social construct. Yes, differences in religious belief, practice, and doctrine do exist. At the same time, these differences are often very slight. They're minimal in many respects. And to an outsider, say from a different faith, you can't even notice the difference in them sometimes. Or even if you're within that faith, you cannot distinguish the difference. I mean, somebody who was brought up in the larger Christian denomination, I cannot tell you the distinction between a wide variety of the different Christian sects. I have no idea. They all look the same to me in many respects. That is minimizing how other individuals believe, and that's the problem. These individuals have created a worldview based on their differences, and so it becomes an us and a them. It becomes the other. But it's more than just that. We have distinctions in our nationality, our race, our creed, gender, etc. We can deal with those, right? But when it comes to sectarianism, what we're saying is that our faith, our worldview, our world existence is based on a certain understanding that is absolutely essential to us or to a group. And it's this essentialist nature that is quite problematic because the threat becomes all-encompassing. When we look at the various sectarian groups that we identify as sectarian from our perspective, we see group there, group here. Now the group there might be, to use a term, the majority, the most powerful one. They have the most people, the most money, but they feel severely threatened by the mere existence of a smaller group. And it's this feeling of threat that becomes the problem. Now, the problem is not the inherent feeling of threat, it's the distinction of difference, it is somebody being the other, and we can find ways to handle it. I mean, Christine's mentioned some, we talk about it, we engage, we work together, we recognize there is some common views amongst us. The problem then becomes the exploitation of this. Now, sitting in sort of the Center for Human Rights at the moment, human rights says that all human beings are entitled to certain normative goods. All human beings. Doesn't matter who you are. All of us in this room are entitled to certain things, so says human rights. A sectarian approach says, no, wait a minute. They're different. I'll be nice to them. I'll let them do things. I'll be charitable. But that's completely different than a human rights approach. Because the sectarian view says from the beginning, there's differences that we have to keep our eye on and we cannot let get out of control. And this is the biggest problem. We do not see all of humanity as one. We start seeing differences and distinctions. Then we start seeing groups, leaders, states exploiting this. Discrimination is clearly the biggest human rights issue when it comes to sectarianism. You start making judgments, you start making decisions about an individual based purely on their faith beliefs. You don't care who the person is, you don't care how capable they are, you say, nope, you're one of them, therefore I've made up my mind. But we also see discrimination, marginalization leading to acts of violence within communities. We see communities acting in response to governmental authorities through violence and other activities that destabilize society. And as in the discussion we had last week regarding terrorism and extremism, government responses then become large threats to human rights as well. As I said, a lot of the sort of sectarian problems we're seeing in the world today are very much geopolitical, geostrategic conflicts. It's not about the sectarian issue, it's about politics. It's about the manipulation of politics. Now that's something that can be discussed here in Geneva, but perhaps is more best discussed in New York through the General Assembly, through the Security Council. But at the same time, within our communities, we need to find ways to overcome how these sectarian differences are being exploited. One of the problems a number of researchers are pointing to is the hyperactive media we have in the world today. 24/7, the news is on, we can always find something, and social media. Social media allows the exploitation of difference with dramatic causes. It doesn't matter if the facts are there, it doesn't matter if the argument's correct. Somebody can sort of say, this group is doing this to our group, look at this, you must respond, you must raise up, you must create violence to prevent the destruction of our group. And this is the biggest threat of sectarian politics, is that you have two or three, multiple sides arguing that the existence of somebody else, by their mere existence, what they do, what they believe in, is going to threaten us. That leads people to violence. That leads people to essentially acting in irrational ways. And that's a real problem when we're trying to provide for human security. Governments, I would argue, need to take the lead in this. Governments need to leave the religion behind. They might have a political agenda, fine, pursue your political agenda. We can never question a state in pursuing a political agenda. But governments must stop exploiting sectarian differences. We have seen the ability to overcome this. The Northern Ireland situation saw the UK and the US government at loggerheads about funding for different sectarian groups. We're seeing this across the Middle East now, different governments supporting different sectarian ideologies, leading directly into violence. But it's not just the current issue of violence, it's the ability to overcome the violence. As I said, sectarian beliefs lead to essentialist ideologies whereby people can't even engage in a conversation. That is going to prevent bringing about security and peace to the current conflicts we're facing. So long as different groups keep exploiting the sectarian divides, we're not going to see tolerant societies come about. Social groups within society also have a very strong obligation. Now I know we cannot put human rights obligations on a social group, human rights obligations are on the state, but the respect for human rights is at all aspects of our society. Social groups need to essentially dump the sectarian issue. This does not mean dump your belief, dump your faith system. It means stop exploiting it for your political ends. Only through a combination of government, social groups, getting rid of this intense mutual hostility, irreconcilable narratives, and these public denunciations can we overcome the problems that sectarianism is currently posing to our ability to bring about human rights and human security. Thank you.